Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for our New England Dairy webinar, From Cow to Cheese, live virtual farm and cheese production tour with Jasper Hill Farm's co-founder and head cheesemaker, Matteo Keeler, and director of marketing, Zoe Brickley. I'm Hillary Wallentuck, registered dietitian and nutrition specialist with New England Dairy. I'll be your moderator today. New England Dairy is a nonprofit education organization staffed by registered dietitians and other professionals that serves as the voice of our local dairy farmers. Our mission is to champion New England dairy farm families and the nutritious foods they produce. And before I begin, I'd like to go over a few housekeeping items. You are muted. However, if you have questions throughout the webinar, please use the Q&A box, type them in, because there will be opportunities for questions throughout the tour. So please don't wait until the end to ask your burning cheese questions. This webinar is being recorded and will be available on New England Dairy's website. Shortly following the webinar, you'll receive an email containing a short evaluation to access your CPE certificate. And 3 randomly selected attendees who complete the post-webinar evaluation will win a curated collection of Jasper Hill cheese. And we invite you to stay connected and follow New England Dairy and Jasper Hill Farm. I'd also like to share with you upcoming free continuing education opportunities from New England Dairy. In October, we'll hear from University of Vermont's Yana Kraft and Allison Unger about the emerging science on dairy fat and its role in the food matrix. And in November, pediatrician Robert Murray will guide us through the relationship between nutrition, immunity, metabolism, and growth, and the impact of inflammation on growth and chronic disease. We also have recordings for our previous webinars eligible for 1 hour of CPE from the Commission on Dietetic Registration. We recently built an entire new webpage for our continuing education content, focusing on you, the user's experience. So we're really excited to be able to offer continuing education in an easy to use, clean, and modern way. You can register for all these opportunities at newenglanddairy.com/continuing-education. And we invite you to join us back at Jasper Hill Farm next week for a live virtual tour for the general public that also includes a professional cheese tasting and more opportunities to win cheese. It's happening next Thursday, September 23rd from 6 to 7:30 p.m. So please join us, bring along your friends and family, and head to newenglanddairy.com to register. And now back to today's tour. Our objectives for today are that tour participants will walk away with a greater understanding of cow care, including cow nutrition, veterinary care, cow comfort, and milking technology, how New England dairy farmers are contributing to a sustainable food system, including reduction of greenhouse gas emissions and protection of soil and water, and microbiology's role in the expression of flavor and food safety. And now I'm thrilled to introduce today's host. Matteo Keeler is the head cheesemaker at Jasper Hill Farm and is the founder with his brother Andy of the Cellars at Jasper Hill. Founded in 2003, Jasper Hill is a social enterprise focused on economic and agricultural development and the conservation of agricultural soils and the working Vermont landscape through production of high-value artisan cheese. The Cellars at Jasper Hill is a centralized facility that was created to lower the barriers to entry for artisan cheese producers by providing ripening, marketing, sales, and distribution services with the intent of allowing farmstead and artisan cheesemakers to scale. And Zoe Brickley is the director of marketing at Jasper Hill. She began exploring the world of cheese while attending the French Culinary Institute in New York City. And from there, she took on the role of cave manager and American buyer at Marie's Cheese. In 2009, Zoe joined the team at Jasper Hill Farm, where she led foundational sales and marketing efforts for the growing company. Zoe loves to learn more about cheese through teaching, having presented hundreds of hours of content for many organizations like ours. She is an American Cheese Society certified cheese professional and sensory evaluator, a member of, please excuse my French, the Guilde Internationale des Fromagers, and chair of the marketing committee for the Vermont Cheese Council. Now I'm thrilled to introduce it to Zoe to get us started.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Jasper Hill Farm. We've been making artisan cheese from milk that we've harvested from our own herd of grazed cows since 2003. And I am in an underground cheese cave right now, one of 7 vaults. We're going to show you a few of them today. And we're in the Northeast Kingdom of Vermont. So up in the, up along the Canadian border and in what's I would consider to be the most sparsely populated and probably one of the more challenging places to farm. A lot of rocky hillsides. So we'll hear a little bit from Mateo about why the idea of starting a dairy farm in such a challenging environment, how we ended up here. But before we cut away, I wanted to show you where we are because the next time you see me, I'm going to be popping up in a different cheese cave. So we are in the Bloomy Rind Vault. Bloomy Rinds is sort of the family name for brie style cheeses. Brie is just the most popular bloomy rind we all know. It's like calling every copy machine a Xerox, calling every soft white rinded cheese a brie. So if you look in at these cheeses ripening away, we see young harbison here. They're wrapped with a strip of spruce bark, and they're just starting to get a little peach fuzz on top, emerging through a yeasty layer that we've cultivated. So this is a living natural rind that's actively softening the cheese over time. At about 8 weeks old, this cheese is going to be so softened by that natural rind that you can spoon it out and slather it on a piece of crusty bread. So a little bit farther along here, you can see one that's really in its fluffy bunny stage. So this is a white flora called Penicillium candidum, very specific sort of meadow of little tiny white mushrooms you can imagine. It's in the fungi family, and that's part of a community of yeast and flora that we're very deliberately growing on this style of cheese. And we've created the environment where I am right now, the temperature and humidity, to encourage the specific family of flora to grow. So without further ado, I'm going to pass the mic over to Mateo, who's in our brand new creamery. We're seeing him in his natural habitat, and he's going to tell us a little bit more about the founding of Jasper Hill Farm.
Hi, everybody. I'm so pleased to be here with you all today. Thank you for tuning in. Look forward to sharing and answering some questions in a few minutes. But I thought I'd just start out by bringing you along the history of our journey. And it began really as a quest to satisfy 3 intrinsic needs. In our mid-20s, Andy and I really distilled it down to like 3 things: meaningful work in a place that we love with people that we love. And Greensboro is a happy place of our collective family childhood. Our family's been summering on Caspian Lake here for 100 years, coming up on 100 years. We have 2 summers to go. But this is a landscape whose pastoral beauty is defined by the footprint of the farmer. And as Zoe mentioned, Northern Vermont is a challenging place to milk cows. You know, it's been a marginal economy since there was an economy here, really. Nonetheless, as far as I'm concerned, it is the most beautiful place in the world. You know, cheese for us is really just a lever that we're yanking on in order to create a livable community, make and model great environmental stewardship, land stewardship, animal husbandry, and redefine what it means to milk cows in you know, the 21st century in Northern Vermont. For generations now, there has been this transfer of wealth from rural communities to urban and suburban centers through pricing mechanisms, and that's all driven by food policy. What we're really doing is plugging into markets where there's plenty of disposable income, building a pipeline to those markets, putting high value products into those pipelines, and extracting capital back into our community in such a way as to create sustainable school systems and enable us to, you know, live and have social culture and economy here. We have a lot of noise going on. We're still a little under construction. Not sure if you can hear that in the background. What we're looking at here is the original creamery. My brother Andy and I built it in 2003, and we ripened our cheese in the cellar beneath the production space here. This past year, we really kind of developed, you know, a new concept that's going to enable us to grow over the next, you know, 10 years of the business. We built about 8,500 square foot addition and installed some reconditioned copper cheese vats that are straight out of the French Alps, which we're using to make raw milk Alpine style cheeses in basically a new, quite efficient manner that is going to enable us really to bring in up to 10 farms, the milk from 10 neighbors essentially, moving forward here. So basically the way this works is you'll see there's no drain here. We bring fresh raw milk into the building. Milk is generally less than 24 hours old. We can collect milk 7 days a week from our grass and hay fed herd. We make these cheeses with natural starters, and that we produce in these automated computerized incubators. When the curd's ready to mold, we're able to essentially hit a button here on the screen that turns on a vacuum pump, and we vacuum the curd out of the vats and down into a vacuum molding system, which we can see down below. So this morning we made Alpha Tolman. You can see it in the presses, but essentially the way this works is the curds and the whey end up in the vacuum bells, and the curd settles down into forms that are pressed up against the bottom of a gasketed connection underneath the bells. After which point, press for a minute and then cut into smaller blocks, which are placed in molds and then pressed for 4 or 5 hours until acidity comes into range.
Matteo, oh, sorry. I'm going to quickly ask a question for those who might not be very familiar with cheese making. What is a starter? You know, taking a couple steps back, what's a starter? Is that rennet? We had some questions come in about that.
Absolutely. So starter is generally a mix of lactic acid bacteria. And what the lactic acid bacteria is essentially doing is metabolizing the lactose in the milk or in the curd and producing lactic acid. And that fermentation is essential to the production of safe cheese. Mm-hmm. Essentially, what we're doing is we're fermenting the sugar in the milk and creating an environment that creates a selective pressure, so to speak, which makes the growth of undesirable organisms, spoilage organisms, and pathogens much more complicated. That's essentially what cheese making is all about. It's, you know, aggregating the protein, the fat, and preserving it for consumption, and that's been going on for about 10,000 years now. What we're doing is really using traditional practices that go way back to the essentially the dawn of like human civilization, Western civilization, using some of the same techniques that are primordial in essence, and plugging them into like a modern dairy production system. Rennet is coagulant. It's how we essentially capture the protein, aggregate the protein and it's an enzyme called chymosin that clips the kappa casein between the 105th and 106th amino acid in that chain. And when that happens, it basically loses a hydrogen ion, which reverses the polarity, attracts a calcium molecule, and the polarity of the proteins is changed so that instead of repelling, because they're negatively charged the way they are in like milk, they attract one to another and create a matrix, and that matrix is called a curd, right? And so ultimately what we're doing is mimicking the way that a calf would digest milk, and that enzyme chymosin exists in the abomasum, the fourth stomach of an unweaned calf, right? So these are essentially four ingredients. We have milk, we've got salt, we've got starter cultures, and we've got rennet. And those four ingredients, you can make 1,000 different products. So
one more question, or multiple questions coming in, but so there's been a lot of questions about flavor. Like, so where does that flavor come in?
Flavor is really driven by the enzymatic potential of the milk and the curd. So it's driven really by the microbial diversity, right? So the more diversity of microbes that you have in your milk or in your cheese, the more flavor potential there is, because like chymosin, enzymes work only in very specific locations. It's the microbial diversity in that ecology that really drives flavor production, because each of these enzymes works only in very specific locations on a protein, and flavor production there's a linear correlation between microbial diversity and complexity of flavor, which is why raw milk cheeses have so much more flavor potential and they can be safe as long as the milk and the farming system is capable of producing diversity without pathogens, right? And I know there's some questions about raw milk specifically, and cheese and raw milk cheese. And just to be clear, we're not big advocates for like the wholesale sale of raw milk in and of itself, right? But we have these technological hurdles in the cheese making process that make raw milk cheese intrinsically safe. And if you think about some of the great cheeses in the world, Roquefort, Parmigiano Reggiano, Gruyere, Bailey Hazen Blue, Alpha Tolman, they're made from raw milk, and they have been forever, and they're linked to the production of milk with very specific farming practices. For instance, no silage, right? And that's a big one. Not all milk is created equal. We're creating cheeses that are some of the farming practices and that are linked to, a landscape.
We have registered dietitians and we have health professionals on this call. Raw milk pasteurized milk is the same nutrition without any of the risks of raw milk, and raw milk cheese, like you're producing, must be aged for a minimum of 60 days. So there are safety protocols in place from the government, to consume and, produce raw milk cheese. But so I know we have so much to cover. Matteo, I really do thank you for your time. I wish we could just get in your brain for the whole hour, but we do have, we've seen kind of, the beginning stages of cheese making, but, let's take a few steps back and see where your milk comes from, what the cows are eating. And we had the opportunity to talk to cropping manager Ellie Searles about the steps dairy farmers take and cheesemakers take to care for the land and the animals, all while producing nutritious milk. So let's roll that video.
We are at Andersonville Farm in West Glover, Vermont. Here we milk around 220 Holsteins. In order to control the microbial volatility of raw milk in a way that ensures the safety and maximum quality for consumers, we feed exclusively dry hay, no fermented feed, so no silage, no corn silage, no haylage. First of all, the landscape in the rural communities, I think, are like the most striking, defining qualities of this area. The cropping crew makes feed primarily for Andersonville Farm, and we hay about 950 acres in the towns of Craftsbury, Barton, Glover, Greensboro, and Hardwick. It's a volley between reacting to weather like hours before or as it is occurring, and then also forecasting. It's a lot of forecasting. Like maintaining herd numbers and maintaining quality standards. And then harvesting their grasses when, they're at peak quality, and also, mentionable volume, so that we're economically harvesting, high component feed. We're milking Holsteins because that's what was here when we came here, and we've only been trying to improve the herd genetics then. We've also been diversifying, breeding to other breeds. And then Jasper Hill had a small Asher dairy that was dissolved when COVID got really intense last year. And those milk cows were transitioned into this herd. So we are mixed in a way. And those Ashers are here for their different milk components. What is your travel distance? How far are you asking your animals to travel to work for their own feed? And here we're fortunate enough to have this big portion of land close to the farm. And another thing that works for us is we have plenty of acres to hay. We have plenty of acres to hay. And one of the nice things about grazing here at Andersonville is these groups can go out and harvest their own feed for the day, which is less work for the people mixing a total mixed ration for the dairy, and less diesel fuel expended, less amount of haying and tedding and raking and baling that we have to do here. We harvest the grasses at 30 to 35 days between cuttings, and they're properly fertilized, and we have ample rain and sun. Then we're harvesting something that's got really meaningful protein and fat profile as far as being turned into cheese. Every gallon of milk has that much more cheese solids going towards a wheel. And we also store all of our hay in that big hay tent. So that hay tent probably fits, 3,500, 4,000 bales. And then also we have a hay dryer. So there's 2 hay dryers with giant turbines and forced hot air. And then there's a hay cooler that just kind of draws air temperature air through the bales to delay fermentation before they can be dried in the dryer. So there are about 100 spots for 100 5-foot round bales. It's the only one in North America. They've been buying milk from 2 small dairy farms in Greensboro for a while, but they were always pasteurizing that milk for pasteurized cheese. But we're transitioning to start sourcing milk from small local community farms for raw milk and pasteurized milk, but we're trying to bring on many more local farms. The cropping crew is engaging in a multiple year plan to start measuring carbon, measuring species diversification, and also just general soil fertility, so that we can compare improvements year to year headed forward. I work closely with a representative from Farm Compliance Services, and we have a nutrient management plan that we build together, where he builds it and I execute it. And in that nutrient management plan, that's a big binder that takes all of our 950 acres, all of the fertility we're generating at Andersonville, and basically proportionately distributes it in a way that is both reducing runoff and then also increasing fertility, and is part of our fertility improvement regime. We got a new cement manure pit 2 years ago, and that has revolutionized the way that we're fertilizing our land. And it also has reduced compaction in a way that now we're creating a fertility product that is pure and somewhat undiluted by water, just by the rainwater that falls into it. And so now as like a richer product, it's more meaningful to us. We milk 220 cows and we make this cheese, but we're also like, we are positively influencing and stewarding almost 1,000 acres amidst all these towns, you know, like, and that is meaningful. This is ag land that could be, you know, developed or used in a different way. Something that we do here on the ground in the cropping crew could manifest itself in the rind of some cheese that's been aging for months and months over in Greensboro. And that connectivity is something that we can't afford to forget.
That was awesome. So, you know, we're going to ask some sustainability questions, talk about sustainability. And again, it can be an entire webinar, and they exist. And we do have sustainability topics on our continuing education page. But, you know, everything that we eat has an impact. You know, everyday dairy farmers are impacting our land, our water, and the air that we all share, but they're also continuously innovating and adopting new practices and technologies to use fewer natural resources to feed our growing population. And this is all farms, big and small, all over the country. Actually, in 2008, the US dairy sector was the first food and agricultural sector to conduct a full life cycle assessment, which showed that US dairy contributes just 2% of all US greenhouse gas emissions. And they are continuously like improving, reducing that impact. So highly suggest go to newenglanddairy.com, visit our Farm Life page to learn more about sustainability. But I think we have some questions for Zoe when it comes to sustainability. So Mateo had started talking about, you know, landscape and, you know, and all of, you know, what the cow's eating, but how does the herd of the cow impact the taste of the cheese?
So where does flavor come from in turn? I think Mateo talked a little bit about microbiology.
Yeah.
And as far as on the herd side of things, it's really interesting. That nice dry hay is huge. It not only creates a microbial profile that is less prone to pathogenic interference than fermented feeds, but it also has a microbial profile that's very rich in lactic acid bacteria. And it has an inherent, which are the starter cultures, as Mateo mentioned. So we kind of have a head start with getting that cheese making going from our own native cultures. And the care that's taken in creating that dry hay and in creating a bountiful pasture that's nourishing for the cows ties us to our place. It's what the French call the concept of terroir, or a taste of place. So you can't be replicated anywhere else. Before we were able to invest in the technology of the hay dryer, we were trucking in hay from drier regions in Canada, spending a lot of carbon getting, you know, feed from a drier climate to where we are here. So that taste of place, it's a little hard to put a fine point on, but the fat, the protein balance, and that microbial profile, and all of the amino acids and natural plant oils are all being rearranged by the cow and in her creation of the fats and proteins that become the cheese curd. It's a very direct link.
Awesome. So where you've changed locations, looks amazing. Where are you? This is what we've come for. We're so excited.
Okay, so I am in our cheddar vault, and you can see it's a little bit different scale here. So the little carts of white bloomy rind cheese I was talking next to, that's a batch of cheese as made in our creamery. And in this vault, we're looking at cheeses made by our partner right up the road in Cabot, Vermont. So this is Cabot cloth bound, these round wheels. And one batch made at the more efficient Cabot facility is about 100 of these 35-pound wheels. So a little bit different scale of production. But this partnership with us, with a bigger company, at the time, we were the smallest, newest cheesemaker in Vermont when we struck up a partnership, and they were the biggest. And it was a very unlikely scenario, but this cheese in particular made this underground facility possible. So Cabot was seeing all this growing energy and enthusiasm in the artisan cheese world. So they were seeing French restaurants putting cheese plates on the menu in the late 90s, early 2000s, right? Jacques Pepin and Julia Child had really spurred that interest with American eaters. And then they were going into these beautiful new cheese shops and cheese counters and seeing Cabot cheeses in the dairy case or the deli case, and then an imported British bandaged cheddar being tasted and handed over the counter to someone by a cheesemonger. And I think that they just saw that and wanted to participate a little bit more directly in this growing excitement about artisan cave aged cheese. So these are the most value packed cheeses possible. Andy Matteo started making cave aged cheeses, which is a lot more work than sealing it up in wax or plastic and coming back to it a year later, because the market value and perception is so much greater. So this is the most valuable thing that you can make out of the raw material of milk. And so when in Cabot's interest in creating a cave aged cheese that could kind of hang in a specialty cheese counter, they reached out to the cheesemaking community in Vermont, and Andy and Matteo, being the risk takers that they are, were the first ones to say, like, yeah, we'll grow mold on that. We'll cultivate a beautiful living natural rind on your cheese. And a year later, it was delicious. And they tasted it out to their customers, Cabot did, but they had a small amount, just a couple shelves worth in the cellar of the original creamery space where Matteo was. And they had a hard time kind of breaking into that set. And they didn't, their relationships were with much larger supporters who were buying truckloads of cheese. So Andy Matteo checked in after a year of this aging, getting a little rent check every month really helped their growing business, and said, you know, we'd love to keep going. How are sales? And they're like, oh, well, this is really fun. We're definitely treating our buddies out there, but you know, we don't think we'll continue with the program. It just isn't a good fit with our collection. And Andy Matteo were like, whoa. We could definitely take care of placing those 30 or 40 wheels, because they were at the time directly on the phone with chefs and specialty shops all over the country. As a FedEx-based business, they never had enough cheese for a refrigerated truck to show up to participate in a national distribution network. So it was easy for them to get this cheese out there. They decided to co-brand it, and it won a huge award its first year on the market. And they literally took it to the bank and invested in this 22,000 square foot underground facility with the idea of expanding opportunities for other cheesemakers who were, you know, scratching their heads about how to build a little bit more volume and get pallets of cheese instead of little individual boxes of cheese.
Yeah, why underground? Can you tell why are you underground? And I know it's huge. You have, was it 7 vaults or is it 9?
Yes, we have 7 vaults. So the reason that we're underground is that we are mimicking the temperature and humidity of a root cellar in the Loire Valley of France before refrigeration technology. So before humans came up with, long before humans came up with refrigeration and wax, they came up with cheese. And so putting it in a cool, stable environment was the way of preserving it once they had salted, dehydrated the liquid milk and acidified it, right? It preserved the curd, but now what are you going to do with it? So we're at around 50 degrees all year round here, and every vault has a slightly different climate, but it takes a lot less energy to kind of dial in exactly where we want to be for each cheese style, starting with that base of 50 degrees Fahrenheit and quite high humidity. In this natural, you know, untreated concrete with these wooden shelves, these natural materials foster life, help maintain humidity.
And speaking of cheddar, just quick nutrition question that we've seen a couple of times during the webinar so far is about lactose intolerance, and you know, what cheeses are best for lactose intolerance. So we're actually looking at hard cheeses. These cheeses include, you know, like cheddar, Parmesan, Colby, Swiss. When cheese is made, like we saw from Matteo, the curd is separated from the whey, and the whey is where most of that lactose is found. And then the minimal lactose left in the curd breaks down considerably as the cheese ages. And, you know, just by also pairing cheese with other foods like, you know, like crackers or bread, you know, really make it a cheese charcuterie board, you know, you give your body more time to help it digest the lactose. So yeah, hard cheeses, give it a shot. So I want to actually quickly ask you, Zoe, when making the cheese, what happens to the whey? You know, thinking about, you know, food waste and, you know, sustainability, what does Jasper Hill do with the whey?
All right. Well, Cabot has a very innovative way of managing their whey. They have reverse osmosis systems that draw out the moisture, and they can actually use the water left over to clean their facility. They're able to ultra purify it. And then the solids left over, that protein, they have a way of basically spraying it into an oven that turns it into a fine powder. And they're able to package that retail for, you'll see it at like GNC, sorry to buzz market, but it's as an additive for your smoothies in the morning, or it can be used in all kinds of applications of making, you know, flavorings and chips and things like that. So that's what you do when you have a lot of whey on your hands. At Jasper Hill, we don't have quite as much. In the beginning, our best advice to new cheese makers is have pigs. Whey-fed pork is delicious. It's also a nice outlet for cheese batches that don't turn out quite right. Always turn it into bacon. So we've usually got some pigs roaming the woodlands, enjoying some whey. And then we also will put it back onto fields to help, you know, get those nutrients back into the landscape in a way that isn't, you know, too concentrated in any one place.
So we're looking at, you know, these huge, large format cheese. Like, how much does that weigh?
Fresh off the presses at Cabot, that was a 40-pound round of curd. And over the cave aging process, even though there's humidity being pumped into this room, they're going to lose 15 or 20% of their moisture. So that's part of why these artisan cheeses are a little bit more expensive. It's the angel share there. So 34, 35 pounds is a typical finished weight of one of these wheels. So it's...
And how does that aging affect the texture of the cheese? So, you know, we see, can you talk about, yeah, aging and different textures?
Absolutely. When you try a cheese like this next to a classic New England white cheddar, which we love, it's a very different experience. So the texture is going to get concentrated from that moisture loss. And also at these, you know, slightly more elevated temperatures than would be typical with ripening cheese, more traditional, you're going to end up with a lot of protein breakdown and fat breakdown. And that's where the flavor is going to come from. And also a softening of the texture. So it's a little bit less like squeaky and rubbery, right, over time. And in fact, individual amino acids in the protein get so metabolized by the microbes that are ripening the cheese that a specific amino acid, tyrosine, will fall out of suspension and find its buddies and crystallize with itself and cause those little flecks and crunchies, that crystalline texture. Yeah, really adds a lot to that experience. Very traditional cheese texture that way.
So we also had a question come in, and yeah, and please, you know, keep asking these questions. These are great. We're all food nerds here. We're so thrilled to be here. So, you know, proper storage of cheese. You know, you have this cheese sitting here for, I believe you said a year. You know, it could be aged up to a year, and it's fine. But then, you know, I bring it home from the grocery store, and within like a week, you know, it's moldy. So, can you talk about, you know, what's protecting your cheeses and, you know, proper storage at home?
That is one of the most frequently asked questions I get, especially if you've made this mini investment in a beautiful piece of cheese. You want to make sure that you're going to get the most out of it. So in the caves, we have these natural rinds that I keep talking about, these community of microflora that we're cultivating on the surface, and that's really forming a protective barrier. These cheeses are also wrapped in linen, which is a traditional technique of cheddar ripening specifically, and other cheeses from the British Isles. So you can kind of see the edge of the cloth that we add to the cheese there. So we're able to cultivate the microbes we're looking for at kind of the right time, and then they form this sort of crust that's protecting the cheese. And then once you get it home, you've exposed the center of the cheese almost as if it's like a fresh cheese again, and that rind wants to heal and repair itself and grow back over that cut face. We generally recommend facing it, just kind of scraping off that outer layer. We're not too shy about flora around here, as you can imagine. But if you want to prevent that and keep your cheese as clean as possible on the surface, honestly, tin foil or maybe a little parchment paper is a great way of just kind of making sure that's flush against that cut surface, and then pop it in a Tupperware so it doesn't dry out and crack. Our cheese refrigerators, our regular refrigerators, are much windier and drier than this environment that we're in now. So cheeses will dry out and lose that supple texture. Awesome. Tupperware, it'll do it.
There you go. Awesome. Thank you. So I know we have we have, a few caves to visit, and different types of cheese to look at. But, maybe as we're talking, tell me, someone said, what does it smell like in there? Like, can you describe it? Because we've never seen this. And I can only imagine how it smells.
It's earthy, I think is one nice way to put it. It smells to me like the cellars at Jasper Hill. And when I worked at Murray's with French cheeses, I would open these boxes and this aroma would come out from the cheese rind. And when I had finally had an opportunity to go visit the cheese cave where those wheels came from, it was like I had been there before. That aroma was so familiar to me and so unique that if you're experienced working with a lot of different cheeses, you get to kind of know that personality. So the personality of this cave is, it smells a little bit like a forest after a spring rain. Okay. And also I'm getting notes of what you might not be able to put your finger on at first, but I've definitely attuned to the aroma of ammonia. So when proteins break down, they are volatilized and you get ammonia molecules from the nitrogen in the protein. So that's a natural byproduct of ripening. As these flavors are getting more complex, ammonia is coming out of these cheeses. And we like for these hard cheeses for there to be a little bit of that gas in the air. We're well under OSHA standards as far as the limit goes, but that those gases help create a selective environment to make sure that the flora that we're looking for is what's flourishing on the cheese. So a little bit mushroomy, forest floor. Cheesy. It smells also near these fresh blocks that we see here are they smell like a dairy. They smell like butter, a little bit like cake batter in a funny way.
Awesome. So, I think we really want to see some of your, your shorter age cheeses or, the fresher cheeses. But when we're traveling between the caves, like, how do you prevent, like, talk about safety and preventing cross contamination between the caves? Because I'm sure you worked really hard on that microbiology. You don't want to cross contaminate.
That's true. We have an on-site microbiology lab actually, and a couple lab techs who are constantly monitoring our milk from any source. Even if we're pasteurizing that milk, we're still monitoring the microbial profile of it. And we're constantly swabbing and taking environmental samples, not only of the cheese, but of the floors and the walls and the drains, just so we can really keep a close eye on the family of microbes that are here. And that's a part of our food safety plan, is that environmental monitoring. We do that on the barns and in the creamery as well. In terms of the vulnerabilities here, we're worried about dirt coming in. That can be a vector for listeria. We're worried about like mucous membranes, where any staph might be. That's usually more on the barn side of things, Staph aureus. And salmonella, which is very rare in our environment. It tends to be more associated with, chicken farms, none of which are kind of around here. And E. coli, which is, wash your hands and avoid going from the barn into the cave. So you can see my sweet outfit here. I'm camera ready. I've got wellies that I scrubbed with an acid solution on my way into the caves here. Yep. You can see we've just scrubbed the floors at the end of the day. We have really tight protocols in place in terms of a tool that would be used on the ground, on sort of an in between the ground and a cheese contact surface, and then on a cheese contact surface. These are all color coded, and we have a really robust set of GMPs and SOPs in place to make sure that our staff understands what we're trying to accomplish and knows how to follow the structure in place to keep the cheese as safe as possible. So that's a combination of training, specialized tools, lots of cleaning. Cheese making is, 10% cheese making and 90% cleaning. And then, as I mentioned, that environmental and product sampling plan, just to make sure that we know who's thriving and where.
Awesome. So we have a couple of just like more culinary questions. So folks want to know best cheeses for melting.
Okay, so a firm or semi-firm cheese with a smooth texture. These cheddars that I'm standing next to are beautiful when grated over a dish. I would use like a semi-fine box grater maybe and treat it almost like a Parmigiano Reggiano, where you get the kind of like fluffy curls on top, but it's not going to melt that well. If I want to use especially a cave age cheddar that has that crumbly texture, more acidic cheese make. Matteo mentioned the calcium as something that's holding the proteins together. That's also it's holding an end texture together. So a cheddar like this, there's been a lot of acidification during the cheese make. You dissolve the calcium away. There's actually less calcium in the finished product and a less bendy, supple texture. On a cheese like an Appenzeller or a Gruyere, you have a lot more calcium retained in the make. It's a shorter make. You're building less acid. You're keeping your minerals there, and you have that bendy texture. That bendy texture is the key to the like grilled cheese pull of having just the right amount of moisture and just the right amount of calcium in the cheese to create that goo and that flow. So I would say like Fontina, Gruyere, Appenzeller, those mountain style cheeses. Raclette is another great go-to. Are all like what you want to blend in with a more crumbly cheese like Claflin if you want to get that goo factor going.
Awesome. Awesome. So can you take us, cameraman behind you, my awesome colleague, let's see, can we see some fresher cheeses? Well, folks really want to see some fresh wheels.
Some brand new, okay, so like just introduced to the vault in this cave?
No, let's go to another cave,
Another cave, younger cheeses. Okay,
yeah,
sure.
younger cheeses. You're the expert here.
While I move, shall we roll the video of how we care for these large format cheeses?
Yes, definitely. Let's roll that. And yeah, because I know big caves underground connection between them isn't the best. So let's look at some technology at Jasper Hill. So what we're looking at here is super cool piece of technology. It's actually a robot that has the ability, works with their large format cheeses like the ones you were just seeing, super heavy, that actually takes care of the cheese, washes them with a brine, brush and vacuum, developing cheddars because their natural rinds slough off, and they need brushing and care during that year of ripening. So prior to the robot, they were using, staff to manually care for these large format cheeses. That was tough, and there's such a low population area, not enough humans to physically, or physically suited to care for, keep up with the needs of cheese. Cheese is needy. So, robot arrived, they found, that the cheese quality actually improved, as did the quality of the work lives of staff. They didn't lose staff. But staff could actually shift hours away from this physical labor and spend more time understanding and improving cheese, participating, making cheese, attending sensory evaluations, recipe development. So this is just one example of really cool technology used to, bring ancient practices, into make them modern and, practice technology throughout, all dairy farming. It's really cool. They're constantly, again, evolving to keep up with our growing population and, being able to feed folks with nutritious, affordable, accessible milk. So we got drones on farms, to monitor crops and cows, methane digesters to recycle cow manure into renewable energy, robotic milkers, cow Fitbit. So super cool. Highly suggest, visit a farm, visit newenglanddairy.com to learn about, all the ways farms and cheesemakers are using technology. But looks like we've moved. Where are we now? What does it smell like?
Okay, it's a very different aroma in here. This is the wash rind cheese family. So a lot like those bries I was talking about, the bloomy rinds, small format, high moisture, really quick ripening. So with a high moisture cheese like this, they're going to be ready to eat in that 6 to 8 week range, where it takes a year for a harder cheese because there's less water activity for the microbes that are breaking down the fats and proteins and making those flavors. So these are sort of shooting stars. They come and go pretty quickly. There's a lot less cheese in here, but we turn a lot more batches through this space in a given year. So it does all kind of add up. You can see we're back to about a 500-pound batch scale of production. And so this wash rind family, it's kind of like a brie. You get similar gooey textures of those bloomy rinds, but instead of a mushroomy flavor or maybe roasted green vegetables and garlic that we get in like a really good aged camembert style, The wash strain family tends to go in like a meaty, fruity direction. So think peaches and cream, cured ham, like prosciutto flavors, roasted nuts, nut butters, like cashew butter is a flavor profile that comes up a lot. And the bark is worse than the bite, we like to say with this family. This is the stinky cheese family. So Limburger, Epoisse, those classic orange sticky rinded cheeses that have a very pungent aroma. We tend to find that on the nose, you're like, woo, that's really something. That's what is in my fridge. Is this okay? But once you actually take a bite, it's much more mellow and approachable than you would have expected. So these are Willoughby that we're looking at right now. This is a Willoughby that's been washed in Lemmick cider. It's a fun collaborative process that we do with some of our best customers. They'll sign up to take a whole batch and we'll wash a cheese in a beverage of their choice that pairs really nicely with it. And that's something that, you know, it's a monastic tradition of washing a cheese in a salt brine or in a beer, a wine, or a spirit. And this is before there was sort of clean drinking water around. So brines and spirits were the safest thing to wash a cheese with. And why would you be washing a cheese? Well, I mentioned a monastic tradition. Monks kind of invented the 8-hour workday. So they would pray in the morning. They'd have their cows milked by staff of the abbeys. And then they'd have fresh milk in the vat. They'd make cheese for 4 hours. And then they'd have a long lunch prayer session. They'd eat a banquet sized, kind of medium sized meal with all of their buddies. Then in the afternoon, their cheese would be made, but they had 4 more hours of work. So they'd go down into their ripening cellar and didn't have much better to do than wash off any molds that they saw growing or fluffy white flora, which we encourage on the breeze, which were developed by harried housewives who had too much going on and they're setting it and forgetting it, letting the fluff grow. But the monks had time and sort of purist inclination, and so they were using a brine to wash off the fluffy white vertical molds without realizing that they were actually encouraging a symbiotic community of yeast and bacteria. If anyone recognizes that acronym, SCOBY, what we use to make kombucha, a symbiotic community of yeast and bacteria. It's a different group of microbes. There might be some overlap, but that's basically what we're encouraging to grow and what those monks discovered by trying to be purists. They were actually creating a very diverse cultural smear on the surface of their cheese.
That's so cool. So we actually, when we had talked, I think a couple of weeks ago, you were telling me about brie and the rind and it growing back. Can you share that? Because you wowed us. We were so yeah, we loved it. Yeah.
Absolutely. So those cultures of that fluffy white bloomy rind, that brie style rind, are actually added to the milk along with the starter culture. So those would be called the ripening cultures. So we sort of add each, a little bit of blend of each one. With a wash rind cheese, we'd be adding those yeast and bacteria sort of kick-starting microbes. And if you put it in a nice temperature and humidity controlled environment, if you hit the right pH and moisture and salt in your recipe, then you've created the perfect conditions for that fluffy white flora to grow. And it starts to emerge out of the surface of the cheese right on cue. At a very 6 days after the make, the yeast grows first, tempers the acidity on the rind, makes a beautiful place for that fluffy white flora to grow, and then it comes right up. So when these cheeses are fresh, you can see there's cut pieces here every so often. We've taken a chunk of these cheeses and tested them for moisture and pH, fat and protein proportions as a way to see how successful we were with our make. You get that information back to the cheesemakers so they can continuously improve. But it's amazing, especially in the bloomy rind vault, we'll take that chunk out of that test piece of cheese and the rind will grow right over that cut face. It's the cheese is very resilient and the rind really wants to grow.
So cool. Well, we only have a few more minutes left, which is very sad. I could ask you cheese questions all day, but one question came in and, we love to talk about eating cheese. What's the best temperature to serve cheese?
So room temperature, when milk goes in the vat, the starter cultures work best when the milk is at the body temperature of a cow, basically. So milk fresh out of the cow is perfect. If you've cooled your milk to hold on to it for, until the next morning, you're going to warm your milk back up to that body temperature of the cow zone. And the creamery is usually somewhere in the 90-degree range. You want to keep a nice warm place for those cheese making microbes to do their thing. Then you reduce the temperature in the draining room down from the make room and a little bit warmer than the cave. And then now we're in a cave this feels to me like maybe 48 degrees, 49 degrees Fahrenheit. So nowhere in that have we talked about a refrigeration temperature. Cheese spends its whole life above refrigeration temperature.
Mhm.
We chill it right before we put it into the supply chain. So you want to get cheese back to its happy place before you enjoy it, which for me would mean taking it out of the fridge at least a couple hours before serving it in the original package that you purchased it in, and then unwrapping it just before you eat it so it doesn't dry out. So you want to bring the wrapped cheese out on your counter. I'm known to keep some counter cheese under a dome, big wedge of hard cheese that you can put it in anything, snack on it as you walk by. We're so careful with what we do here, and we've end product tested every batch that goes, that there's no inherent risk of a cheese reaching room temperature.
For someone who's like really interested in cheese, wants to learn more, maybe even wants to make this their profession, like where do you recommend that they start? Like how do you get started there?
Get thee to a cheesemonger is my best advice. So a cheesemonger is somebody who actively sells cheese in a retail setting. And if you look hard enough in most bigger towns, you're going to find somebody with a specialty cheese counter who's able to cut and taste you cheese right off the wheel. That's the best place to learn. And if you're lucky enough and are able to work behind a cheese counter, I've seen people do it as a second career. They spend their evenings, weekends working behind a cheese counter, getting that great context of understanding for all the different styles and flavors and textures and how to build your vocabulary around that. And then the doors open to a lot of different places across the supply chain that that one can contribute. So the best place to start is by eating it. Eating it with a buddy who knows a lot about it. Yeah.
All right. And that's why we have you. This will be recorded. We can come back to it and eat cheese with you. But, really, that's all the time that we have for questions. Thank you so much, Zoe and Matteo, for sharing your expertise. And this now concludes our webinar. Again, thank you so much. I hope you all eat cheese tonight. Enjoy.
Thank you.